This is actually going to be a really interesting chat that we have going on. So about to bring up Shelley Peterson, who's the Associate Fellow of AR and MR from Lockheed Martin Space, and she's going to be leading a panel discussion with the Barbara Bush Foundation and industry colleagues about the creative use of XR and its potential benefit to literacy. I just got to try a demo of the application backstage on the HoloLens, and I found out that apparently I operate on a 10th grade reading level. So my parents are going to be thrilled about the college education they put me through. If anyone asks, I went to Ohio State University. So I went to Michigan, so. Uh-oh, a Hawkeye. Oh boy, it's a good thing this is the last talk because I'm getting off stage. So everybody please welcome up Shelley Peterson and the crew up to the stage. Thanks very much.
What? Hey. So hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to introducing you to the group here. Have a great group of colleagues here with me. I have Stephanie Moore. Stephanie Moore is an assistant professor in the Organizational Information and Learning Sciences program at the University of New Mexico. She's also the Barbara Bush Foundation and Dollar General Foundation Fellow. Her work in these foundations focuses on the use of learning technologies for adult literacy and guidance for foundations wishing to invest in development learning technologies. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We also have Ted Dinsmore, the president of SphereGen. Ted Dinsmore he has technologies located in New Haven, Connecticut, in Pune, India, and in Dublin, Ireland.
Thank you.
SphereGen is a software consulting firm that develops and supports custom software solutions for clients. His experience in the world of IT spans over 30 years. When Ted started his first consulting firm, he became invested in developing and supporting Microsoft solutions for large multinational companies. So, welcome, Ted.
Thank you.
And CERI Menendez joins us from T-Mobile. She's the XR lead at T-Mobile. She evaluates and drives augmented and virtual reality projects, partnerships, and strategies. Prior to T-Mobile, CERI worked in the startup and venture capital space in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Europe. During her Fulbright scholarship in Mexico, she established and led the Mexico operations of a social impact investor group deploying over $100 million in social and environmental impact companies. She was the youth delegate for the G20 Summit and a World Economic Forum Global Shaper, focusing on education and career development programs for underrepresented high school and university students in Miami and in Bangkok. So I'm Shelley Peterson. I work with Lockheed Martin. I'm the Associate Fellow for Augmented and Mixed Reality. About 2 years ago, I also joined the Barbara Bush Foundation Technology Advisory Council, and we've been looking at ways to deploy technology as a solution for literacy for the Barbara Bush Foundation. And to set the stage, I would like to ask Stephanie to help us understand the state of literacy in America.
Sure, thank you. So thank you everybody for joining us. Do we have our clicker for our slides?
Shelley has.
Okay.
I don't have that.
Oh.
There we go.
Just a moment and we'll get to the next slide.
Thank you. All right, you played
Excellent.
with this, right?
Here we go.
All right, so let's start off with this statistic of 130 million adults in the US lack proficiency in literacy. That is a staggering number. What that means is 130 million adults in the US read at a 6th grade level or below. 65 million adults in the US read at a 3rd grade level or below. That is 1 in 5, or 20%. That is substantial. So if you think about the implications of that for the workforce, access to training materials, all kinds of things, there are significant implications of this for our economy as well. Now, of these adults, 10% actually access literacy education services for adults. That's, again, a really low number. And the traditional approach to this has been accessing place-based education, where they have to drive and figure out how they're going to solve transportation issues, how are they going to take care of child care issues. There's all kinds of barriers that arise for them to actually access place-based education. So the Barbara Bush Foundation is really interested in how we can catalyze different innovations to scale up effective literacy solutions so that we can take literacy education to adults where they are in their busy lives in a way that actually helps them develop the skills that they need. And so the foundation is actually invested in a range of different technologies, like mobile learning, online learning, gaming, things like that. And one of the technologies that we are interested in is the use of HoloLens and augmented reality in particular with VisorGraph and the solutions that they have that Ted's going to talk about in a little bit to determine, A, can we use a device like this to actually assess literacy levels very quickly? And then B, what are some of the possible implementations of that across a range of different contexts where assessing literacy and responding to somebody where they are makes a big difference. So to that point, let's look at slide 2. So 1 in 5 adults, like I said, struggle to even fill out a form. And if you think about how many forms you fill out, whether that's at the doctor's office or the DMV or for different services, and of course we're talking about a population that often is accessing a lot of government services as well, actually filling out those forms to get that support and get those service is difficult to impossible. The 2 maps that you're looking at there overlay literacy rates with health rates as well. We know that literacy levels correlate very strongly with economic status as well as with health outcomes. And it's those health outcomes in particular that we're also interested in here. So when we start talking about literacy, it's not literally just about reading, but it also begins to affect all kinds of avenues of life, like in the doctor's office. So imagine, if you will, a patient who cannot read, who's given a bottle of pills with writing on there, telling them how many pills to take and how frequently to take those pills. With this population, there are significant issues with those patients actually taking medication as prescribed. So we start talking about very real health implications, very real life implications quickly. And there are plenty of cases and examples that we can cite of folks who couldn't read it, so they didn't take their medication, or they took the wrong dosing or the wrong frequency, in some cases with very dire effects. So thinking about literacy, not just as reading and enjoying a book or something like that, but really thinking about the very real world implications of this for 130 million adults. It's a significant challenge. And I think it's exactly that challenge that calls us to be innovative in how we go about addressing that.
So before we move on, I think it's worth highlighting that point, that prescription medication and our health can be severely positively influenced by an increase in literacy levels. We heard an example just a couple of weeks ago where a lady had moved over from out of the country, and she was to take a prescription, and the diagnosis was to take 200 units of a medication, and she read that as 200 pills. And so thankfully they caught it, and she's okay, but a small misunderstanding of the prescription can be quite dire.
Right. And I think it's good to add a little bit of nuance to that data real quick as well. It may be tempting to think that most of these individuals may be English as a second language or something, but in fact, for 2/3 of them, English is their primary language. So we are talking about a significant gap here.
So the 130 million Americans who are reading below that level, that's over 54% of adults.
Yeah, 130 million is over 54%.
And so that's what you see represented.
U.S. adults. And there's a recent UNESCO report from this year, 2021, showing that globally that challenge is 773 million adults worldwide, and that statistic significantly impacts women in particular.
Okay.
Okay, so let's imagine a scenario in which we eradicated illiteracy. That would actually boost the economy by $2.2 trillion because we commissioned a report from Gallup looking at the relationship between literacy and income and poverty. And there are, of course, significant gaps depending on the literacy levels. So if somebody is more like a level 0, level 1 on a PIAC, the PIAC test, which is a very common standardized test for assessing this, their average income tends to be about $34,000 a year. And that's for the ones who are employed. There's a significant number in that category who are unemployed. If we go up even just one level from there, then the average income level, first of all, more people are employed, and second of all, the average income goes up to over $47,000. That's a significant bump if you're talking about salaries in that level. And then as we keep going up the literacy level, you see, of course, continued rises in income. So if we were to change the dial on just that group, going from level 0 or 1 up to a level 2, which isn't even quite getting to a 6th grade level yet, we could significantly boost the economy by getting people to a point where they are qualified for better paying jobs in this country.
So 2.2 trillion, I mean, the US GDP for 2020 was right at 21 million. So this is about a 10% GDP.
That's right.
That's incredible.
This is about 10% of our GDP. So just by engaging, preparing that group of individuals enough that they could participate in the economy would be a substantial boost to the US economy. And some of the text that you've got there, if you've read through that, just talks through how this is also a generational cycle. There's probably a lot of systems folks in here. There's a real feedback loop here around illiteracy. A mother's education tends to be, or not tends, is the strongest predictor of a child's education. And so if a mom has low literacy rates or is not literate, the likelihood that their children will become literate is very low. The odds are not great. So if we can help break that cycle by addressing adult literacy in particular, we know that addressing adult literacy also filters down into family literacy and helps address childhood literacy as well.
So you may see where we're going with this. You see the impact and the potential for opportunities to improve literacy. Now, when you think about how you take a reading test, if you're like me, you read a paragraph and then you are given a couple of multiple choice questions or you're asked questions that you need to answer. And when we think about what that tells us about our literacy level, it's pretty basic. It has a little bit of an ability to indicate whether you comprehend the content, but that's really it. And so we started looking at how can you solve this with technology? And I'd like to ask Ted to explain to us what we're seeing here.
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah, what is this?
So this was a standard of testing when a child, for about the past 30 years, when a child has a reading problem, he or she is usually referred to a optometrist, usually to a visual specialist then. There's a whole progression. And at some point, someone will put this on the child. And this actually tethered to a PC most of the time. It's been the standard of measuring, and it does an XY measurement of the reading. So you hold a physical piece of paper out at a good distance. They set the interpupillary distance for the eyes. It's a setting on the device. And then they read and capture the eye tracking. This is a rudimentary, it's been the standard of care for 30 years of how to measure a child's reading by measuring their eyes. So that's what a visograph is.
Okay, and then let's talk about what you're doing today.
So we took, and to step back for a second there, we looked at what was happening for 30 years. And it was really amazing because you could measure, it was a body of work of knowledge of how to measure how a child reads with grade level equivalents, with all the different components, but wasn't very practical in today's world. The company's been defunct for a while, is actually going offline now. So what we did is we took the Microsoft HoloLens and we started working. We had done a ton of work already in the eye space with the eye capture team with Microsoft, and we really drilled down and came up with VisorGraph. So I think we have a video about it next.
I think so.
Okay.
Let's see, or a few data points here.
Yeah, so Visor as a platform, we started out working with Visor about 3 years ago. And this came out of work with neurologists. I'm based in New Haven, Connecticut, near Yale. And we worked a lot with neurology and thinking about how someone reads is a component of it. This started out with how we'd actually look and do a refraction in real space in optometry. And we've been still working on that. It's still a piece we're working very hard on, visual assessments. And we started getting into visual therapy as well, which was really, really interesting. So we work with patients that have had surgery, and we see when they've had surgery, they lose peripheral, brain surgery, that is, you lose peripheral vision very commonly. So we're using the HoloLens and Oculus and other VR devices, and we've been rehabilitating their visual field. And this has been really, really interesting work. And then we came across, well, the VisorGraph is going, and some of the same people who work on the visual therapy side said to us, could you do something about this? Could you provide a tool for this? So we started working on VisorGraph. This is a short video about what it looks like, I think, right?
Yes.
VisorGraph is the next generation in eye movement tracking technology, using wearable headsets such as the Microsoft HoloLens. VisorGraph uses data collected from saccadic eye movements to evaluate reading performance based on standardized norms for grade levels. Tackling reading problems is a tough job for anyone, especially kids. We are going to show you how a child is assessed using VisorGraph. VisorGraph uses the concept of gamification to combine the functional ability of tracking and assessing eye movements, while kids enjoy using the gaming aspect of an augmented or virtual reality headset. Right now, what you're seeing is the calibration of the HoloLens device so that we can accurately capture eye movements. Once the child is ready to be tested, they are presented with a paragraph to read, and the HoloLens application begins to track their eye movements. General reading comprehension is assessed by quizzing the child with questions related to the passage. Eye tracking tools play an essential role in evaluating factors affecting reading comprehension. With VisorGraph, optometry clinicians, teachers, and parents can view video replays of an assessment. Video simulations show recorded tracking results of eye movements as the passage is read. There is no more guessing about how a child is processing their words while reading. The data is also readily available in graphical formats which are easy for everyone to understand. A subject's reading skills are charted in comparison to standardized grade level averages to allow easy assessment of skill level. Literacy is a critical problem in our communities. 1 of 5 adults struggle to fill out a form. 75 to 80% of special needs students identified as learning disabled have basic deficits in language and reading. VisorGraph can be an essential tool in helping clinicians and teachers easily identify reading disorders. This is the first step in tackling the literacy challenges that exist in our world today.
So we started off in eye assessment, and we came to this point of visual cues and how we look at visualization. And the 3 little things, as we've been doing the pilots and prototype, and there's 3 things that we learned in rolling this out to a number of places. One is that kids like it. It's actually fun for them. I had a set of, we're working with a group, and one of the kids, mom brought in 1 kid to be tested, 2 other kids were with the mom. And sure enough, as soon as we're done with the first one, the other 2 wanted to try it, right? This is a very cool, fun thing. They get excited about it. And we made it runs about 2 minutes the first time. I was explaining many times. We run it 3 times. The first time, we don't tell them that you're going to be quizzed on it. And people go through real too fast because they want to be done with the test fast. The second time, they go really slow because they learn that we're going to quiz them at the end. The third time, we get a real accurate picture of what their eyes are doing. And that's really a common way. But the fun factor of this, actually having them do it multiple times and play with it, it really has become a motivator for them to think about their reading. The other point is really we can easily detect if a student or a person has a visual problem. A lot of times you'll see the eyes go like this, X-aphoria or S-aphoria. We really easily can see that, and it's a quick test for us to say, okay, this is a visual problem. If you're in a school and you're testing 20 kids, and this kid can't even, immediately goes like this, you're like, oh, bro, they need to see a visual specialist. So it's a real easy screening tool that a teacher and reading specialist can use. And the third piece is we're finding a lot of quality data about what's happening in the reading process. Right now, I think we're on the beginning. We've got 30 years of data about how it worked before, but now we're really starting to look at this data and say, okay, large words, how do we break down those words? The cognitive processes that we now can give to the teacher, say, okay, here's how this child reads. Here's what eventually they can come up with reading processes and how to remediate and how to help that child. Giving that cognitive information back to the teachers is really important. Over the past 2 years, teachers around the world have struggled with the pandemic and everything that's happened. They've had to learn tremendously how to teach in this online world. We really owe it to them to provide them tools that can help them help students. So that's really where VisorGraph came from.
Now, there's some interesting things going on here, and I want to have you talk us through some of the screenshots that we grabbed from this video. You see red and green. What does the red-green represent?
Left eye, right eye. And this was really a hard technology piece for us to solve. I got to give thanks to Magdalene and Mudwit from the eye tracking team at Microsoft. They were amazing. When they first came out with the HoloLens 2, the eye tracking was just a singular function. It was a binocular function. We went back to them and said, no, we need each eye independently and the binocular function, because we have to determine where the position of the eye is. Is the kid focusing or looking beyond the page? Which eye is working? S-aphoria and X-aphoria are eye movements. So we want to make sure we capture that data. So showing it in left eye, right eye was a very simple way to do it, and it came up really well. The research of eye tracking has been wonderful.
And why is it important to track each eye independently? Is it not good enough to track just one eye?
It's really important to, and I have to defer to neurologist in this one, but maybe you can help with Stephanie on that one. But it really is important to track both eyes and the binocular, so where it's focusing.
So here you can track each eye independently to see what's going on. Mm-hmm. You have the left and the right.
Right. And you'll see that a lot of times people will skip to, like we were doing Jake backstage here. Jake was jumping all over the place. He was reading really fast. He was skimming.
Scanning.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so many people do that.
Yep.
And that's okay. But then he failed on the comprehension part, right? So we can skim as readers. That's a common reading thing. And help me here, Stephanie, if I'm wrong. But it's where we're not comprehending. We're skimming and we're not comprehending. That really is, okay, we need to read the context.
So everyone, I have to confess, I've taken the test, and what they just described, I did. I blame it on being a mathematician, but I skimmed the page looking for keywords, I think, and then I have to calm down and go back and read. And I didn't realize that I did that until I took the test.
Yeah,
and now I know.
That's why what Ted was talking about earlier with having to get 3 tests is so critical, actually, because the first thing that we see is folks, or any reader, typically does scan the environment. I mean, that's a very common behavior, and it's not surprising. Then, when, like you said, when people learn they're going to be tested on this, then some test anxiety kicks in. So at that point, they're reading for the test and trying to focus on, you'll see it like concentrate on words and things like that so they can memorize those pieces and check those boxes on the quiz. And then once we get about to the 3rd round of reading things, that's when a user will really settle in. We start to get a much more authentic read of how they're reading in a very natural state.
And that's an ongoing testing process forever, right?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
not just
trying
with our
to determine,
technology.
because part of our discussion here was, okay, if we're using this out in the field, how many readings is somebody actually going to have to go through before we get an authentic read of an individual? And trying to answer that question, took quite a bit of time. But
Right.
And I want to mention one of the things that we were doing here is looking at the test book. One of the key things we found, when you put a HoloLens headset on, we automatically do the calibration for the eyes. We have to do that. That takes about 30, 45 seconds. And then the actual reading test is depending upon the length of the text that we give them. So we were working with, and I'm going to pass over to Sherry on this one. We were working with a number of sites, and one thing we really struggled with really hard was when the person testing it couldn't see what was happening. We all know, like in the Oculus or some headsets, we have a parallel view of what's going on. In the HoloLens, Microsoft does have an application running on the PC called Connect, which actually allows us to see what's happening in the HoloLens. So there was two challenges there. One was, well, we didn't want to take any cycles away from the HoloLens because we wanted to focus on the eye tracking. And we didn't also want to, we wanted to make sure that everybody could see at the same time. And the same time part is really, really important because when you're working with a kid or a patient and they have a headset on and they're trying to figure out what's going on, that latency of knowing what's happening, which I'm passing over you now because we took the 5G devices that Jerry provided for us. It was really interesting because now we could see at the same time, and also if you've ever tried to do any type of testing in any school, Wi-Fi's or any hospital, Wi-Fi's are a nightmare. So
we are well aware.
You're well aware.
So Sari, we haven't forgotten about you. We set the stage for the challenge, and there's the potential for impactful technology. What are T-Mobile's interests? How do their interests and objectives map to literacy and to education?
So, hi everyone. I'm sure you're wondering why is T-Mobile interested in education. You all know that T-Mobile has invested a lot of money in the past few years building the largest and widest 5G network in the country. We've also recently merged with Sprint in order to accelerate our 5G deployment. But aside of offering 5G to work at a remote location, building towers, we believe in the importance of 5G for good. And we see the education space as a space that could truly benefit from it, especially when you consider use cases that require live collaboration, with, like the project that we're working on actively with the team. So we're very glad to be here. And aside of this project, T-Mobile has launched an initiative called Project 10 Million, which is one of the many other things that we're doing in the education space. For those of you that are not aware of what Project 10 Million is, we launched it earlier last year. It's a commitment to spend, I believe, $10.7 billion over the span of 5 years to provide free connectivity to over, I think it's 10 million families in the US, free connectivity for 5 years. Since the launch of early last year, I think we've given connectivity to, I'm going to make sure that I'm not saying the number wrong, right? But over 3 million students, and of course this was accelerated with the pandemic. We work a lot with school districts, so that's why when this initiative came to the table, it just seemed like a clear fit. And internally, something else that we're doing is in the T-Mobile for Business area, so our B2B side of the house, we have different industry experts. We have people that used to be CTOs at universities or teachers in public schools or just administrators. And to be quite honest, I understand the importance of literacy, but I didn't understand how game-changing the use of the Microsoft HoloLens and this application was in this space until I shared this information with a colleague in the education side of T-Mobile that was a public school teacher at the Bronx and actually used to conduct assessments. He told me that he would scribble a specific symbol on top of a word when the student was reading. He would time things, and it was extremely time-consuming and actually gave a lot of room to human error, and that it was really, really hard to scale up. So it just seemed like something that we really wanted to work in, considering the connectivity component.
Excellent. So the concept would be to get HoloLens devices to schools with a VisorGraph app, train a facilitator to perform that test, test the children so that you know what level of literacy they are at, and then identify remediation methods, and then test again to see if those remediation methods are working. How soon do you think we'll know or be able to measure which remediation methods are working?
Oh, that
a hard
takes
one.
that takes a lot of time. Yeah, that's about like moving a drug to market. Well, first of all, I want to clarify too that we're talking about not just doing this with children, but also with adult education centers and in contexts where we're working with adults as well. And there's a really interesting there are interesting barriers there in the field of adult literacy and adult education. There tends to be a lot of resistance to technology and even technophobia to some extent, which has explained why so much of it is very focused on place-based education. So having a solution that is very user-friendly, that works quickly, like what Ted was talking about, where you're not sitting there trying to fumble with it for a long time, that feels natural, easy. I mean, all of these, reducing these barriers to implementation are significant. So where we're really going to start with is pilot testing, first of all, with some sites to see how is this working in implementation, what did we learn from that, what are other tweaks that we need to make in order to make this more user-friendly, or maybe we kick up some errors or whatever somewhere. And then we are going to start implementing it. The first question is, can we reliably gather data? And a corollary to that is, can we gather a lot of data? Because one of the other things Ted and I were talking about was we need a larger data set in order to do some better analysis around this. So for example, we need to do some cluster analyses to see, can we identify patterns in the readers? Or when we see a certain pattern, can we start to be able to reliably say, oh, that's a pattern of X, right, and using strategy Y helps address whatever that particular individual's needs are. So getting to that is probably going to take, I would say, year and a half, 2 years.
And I assume it would
iteration and testing and data gathering and going through that, and then we can move on into the phase of saying, okay, now that we know we can identify this, if we use this to assess an individual, implement an intervention, and then assess them again, do we see a change based on that intervention as well? So I'd say 2.5 years, maybe longer.
We'll see, right?
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer.
Interesting one, and I assume it will grow momentum over time, because not only will it be used to test the person taking the test and determine their literacy level, but I think it can also be used to determine which remediation methods are working the best, or to improve upon them so that they're fine-tuned to work well for the remediation process. What happens if you don't have connectivity in an environment, or good connectivity in an environment?
Well, that's what we have to use. My friend Shelley. Because it is really a huge problem. Connectivity is a nightmare for us in schools. Schools and hospitals, any of the environments where we don't have connectivity, it won't work. It has to be connected online.
Why doesn't it work if you don't have connectivity?
A couple reasons. One, we have to, the HoloLens is a fairly lightweight OS. We don't want to put a lot of data on it, and we want it to be able to do its job, which is eye tracking. In this case, we really optimize the HoloLens for eye tracking. So we don't want to have too much going on. We want to save the data back, and all the analytics are on the back-end side, and all the collaboration with the teacher or the administrator is on a PC based. So we really have to have connectivity between the HoloLens, the PC, and the web.
Interesting. Now,
Yeah, and we've seen that also with some of the other applications that we sponsored. We actually worked with a company called Victory XR and launched a virtual reality human cadaver biology lab at a university in Tennessee. And coverage is good, the people that were supporting us locally, like the university team, initially connected the virtual reality headsets that we use to the university Wi-Fi, and nothing was working. And it's the issue of having the firewalls with the university Wi-Fi, the fact that once students are in session, the network gets extremely congested, so 5G was what really helped us out of that one. In addition to that, we also see it here. You see it in another conference that we were at 2 weeks ago, where we were trying to demo other applications, both in education and not in education, using virtual reality and augmented reality. And the ones that specifically involved remote collaboration in a virtual space, the experience was not great until we switched. So we definitely see it in different parts.
Well, something that I find interesting, each of you have worked in a different space from literacy, but have ended up working a literacy pursuit. Mm-hmm. What sparked your interest in working in literacy?
Well, you've done the most, so go ahead.
Well, gosh, yeah, I'm trying to think back now.
When it started?
When it started, yeah, I used to work with the little ones,
Yeah.
right? K-3 literacy in Colorado for a long time. And you learn very quickly just how important it is. I mean, from an education perspective, and I'm in the education field, I'm a learning sciences researcher, and literacy, it really is a gateway to everything else. I mean, math, sciences, all of that good stuff, that just doesn't click into place until a child is literate. So I think once you learn the importance of that and the influence that that has, and the degree to which we can predict a person's employment, income, incarceration, things like that, based around literacy, it just becomes evident it's such a linchpin for so much of positive social outcomes.
The power for good.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I echo what's happening. There's so many things that literacy has impacted. We've all written books, and I published my book at one point. My father was grown up in World War II, Korea, that sort of era, and was never taught to read. I mean, he was taught, but being in the military, you just fill out the forms, right? So literacy is such a big component to everything we do. If we don't have that basis, how do we succeed?
Yeah. This is more of a friendly anecdote. Growing up, I didn't really watch TV. It was mostly reading. If you were watching too much TV, it's go and read a book. And it sounds very simple, but I compare how much I read and how my life has unfolded versus other people around me that didn't really care to take a book. And you see a drastic difference. And then there have been other moments in my life, right, where due to medical reasons, I haven't been able to understand what I'm reading in a piece of paper, and just putting myself in the position of someone that has that as something that has been going on for their entire life versus just the span of a few months, it's completely heartbreaking. So the reason on a personal level that I'm in this is because I know what literacy and just being obsessed with books has done for me, and I'd like to help more people see that and benefit from it as well. So, yeah.
Now, what about using the VisorGraph solution as a method to assess challenges for people who are reading with English as a second language?
So we've designed it for multilingual, so it's all based on how we use it. So far, we've only been focused on English, but we have done some minor testing, and it was really very interesting, where we had 5 students that did under Spanish, and then the same students were under English, and you watched their eye movements, and they were identical. Their fixations, their regressions, the answers to the test on the testing section when they're in a native language were much higher than they were in the English language. But it was really interesting to see how a person's reading and thinking didn't actually, and this is early days, didn't actually make a difference to whether it was English or Spanish in that case. So there's a lot of work we have to do, we can do around this. We designed the tool to be able to use any language, and the administrator of the test can key in whatever text they want, the teacher, like the symbol of the teacher from the Bronx. You can put your own data in, have your own the students can read it. So we've designed it for that. I think it's early days on that, but something we would definitely want to work more on, right?
And what's the benefit of using a head-worn device versus, there are methods to track eyes from a screen?
There are tons of methods with eyes, and there's a lot of variability in those. The nice thing about the head-mounted display is we know where that person's looking, and we know where that page is. When we have things that are PC-based, and we've worked with them in neurology labs before, we don't know that the alignment of the eyes is correct. We don't know a lot of factors, and there's a lot of technology that's done really awesome work there. But it's still, there's so many variables that it isn't easy for the teachers and for the people giving the test to be able to administer as it is if it's head mounted. So it's just ease of use, really.
Interesting. CERI, we've heard some interesting news this week about Snapdragon spaces. Is there an overlap with education there?
Yes, I think you could say so. At least what I can share for now. First of all, we're very excited to be the leading North America carrier for the Qualcomm Snapdragon Spaces announcement. We are looking to build an extremely robust developer ecosystem that truly leverages the power of 5G. In terms of specific use cases that we're looking at, nothing has been announced yet, but things that we have been interested in the past, and by past I mean we're in 2021 still, so 2021. We've seen use cases in immersive technology that touch upon content consumption, touch upon mental wellness, education. There's a startup right now in the current cohort that uses Vue6 classes for, I believe, it's sign language assistance for students in different universities. So all of these use cases, the common thread that you're seeing is that you need strong connectivity to engage in live collaboration or same-time engagement, even if it's just a game. So there's, of course, an element there that aligns with education. Assuming it, of course, leverages the power of 5G, we hope to see some education use cases come through, but I can't say much more. Yeah.
Interesting. So, Stephanie, much of your work in the past there's been a focus on ethics and the ethics of technology, and that's something that we hear as a recurring theme here at the AWE. We want to make sure that the technology is being used in an appropriate manner and for good purpose. With the IRB, can you walk us through what do you look at from an ethical stance for technology like this?
Sure. So actually, I'll kind of back it up before an IRB. First of all, the ed tech industry, of course, is a very large industry, growing industry. When I was at the University of Virginia, I worked with engineering students and business students developing and incubating ideas. And really, the very first ethics starts with, does it work? And in education, that's sort of a prime directive. We don't often concern ourselves so much with efficiency or things like that. It's great when that happens, but the prime directive really is it has to work, it has to result in learning outcomes. And unfortunately, in EdTech as an industry, we don't see enough of an emphasis on really demonstrating efficacy. Does it work? Before products are moved to market. So first things first is starting with that question and being able to demonstrate that question, which is what moves us into how do we set up quality research studies in order to assess that. What Shelley's asking about IRB, I don't know how many people know what that means. It's internal review board. In order to conduct these studies, we have to get approval from an internal review board at our institutions who review research studies basically to ensure that no humans will be harmed in the process of the study. And this stems from, you may be familiar with some histories of some very questionable experiments that were conducted on human beings under very inauspicious circumstances. So the IRB was developed to address that and hopefully prevent abuses through the research and scientific process. So some of what we deal with here is just discussing whether or not something's going to be injected into a human being or something like that. In this case, we don't deal with that, so we don't have to go through some of those avenues. But there's a lot that really has to do with data in particular. And student data rights and privacy are becoming a real hot button issue right now in education, especially with what's happened in online learning this past year and the year and a half, and the collection of all of that data, use of proctoring services and things like that. This has really become a hot topic. So tending to what data are we gathering? How are we protecting that data? Is the student or the learner informed on the data that we are gathering? And really ensuring that as we go about studying and developing these technologies, we are doing so in a very ethical and humane way.
I think it's a very important topic, and it's one that we always want to keep an eye on, whether our focus is on literacy or any other aspect of the XR industry. I think it's the due diligence there is beneficial.
Yeah.
And
Well-
iris recognition and all the eye tracking we're doing is really important data that we must protect people.
Right.
So it's definitely a high button on what we've been looking at.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very sensitive data.
Yeah.
So.
I'd like to thank our panelists today, and we'll take some time for Q&A if anyone has questions on the technology.
Yeah,
Yes,
the microphone.
there's a microphone here and here.
Thanks for this. This is really lovely chat. Pablo, Nexus Studios. I had a question about, I don't know anything about remediation techniques for literacy, but I am curious about if the HoloLens, if you've investigated ways of using it to sort of tighten that loop. Is there a way, I guess, to use the HoloLens to help with the reading, not just the reading assessment, but actually the remediation itself?
You know, that's obviously part of what we are interested in. At this stage, I think that's a very difficult question to answer, to be frank. And as we started this conversation and this collaboration, it was clear that we needed to dial back our starting point to just simply answering the question, you know, can we get that preliminary data that we need? Then the question really becomes, can we implement interventions via the HoloLens as well? From my perspective, that's where it gets really interesting. And you know, so can we design instruction or some sort of reading instruction that would actually then be delivered via the HoloLens? One of the other projects that we're very interested in through the foundation is actually with Humana and using this out in, say, primary care context, where we're not just assessing an individual's reading, but we're also helping to determine and deliver up content for that individual. Perhaps that's multimedia content where we're providing them information in a way that's not so text dense or has no text at all. Multimedia learning and development is one of my specialties. So I think that there's interesting potential there to explore how we use this not just for assessing, but as an intervention device itself as well. At the same time, I don't think we're there quite yet, but I think we could, assuming we get through some of the early testing with this and see really promising results, I think then we could start to explore how do we start to engage multimedia content through a device like this to actually deliver up some high quality instruction as well.
I think that's the exciting part, is when you can measure,
Yeah.
then you can determine what's working best and you can improve upon it
Yeah.
for the remediation process.
Yeah.
It's something that we haven't seen before, and I come from a family of English teachers and librarians, and I'm the mathematician, so of course I want to measure. Any other questions? Okay. I believe that there's an award ceremony tonight, and in this room in a bit. And thank you all for joining us. I know that it's at the end of a very busy day, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week at AWE.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. That was great. And that's the end of day 2 here on the main stage. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks to our panel. One more thing, yeah.
We did want to offer if anyone wanted to try VisorGraph, we can do it later tonight or catch me tomorrow. I have one with me. Or you can download it if you have a HoloLens. You can download it from the App Store. It's free. Anybody, you can try it and see what your eyes look like.
And if you're at work on a 10th grade level as well.
For a second. It's fascinating to see how your eyes work. Highly recommended.
It is. All right, so that's the end of day 2. Thanks everybody for coming. Don't forget the expo hall is still open until 6 o'clock, and then that actually just starts off a jam-packed evening. So right connected to the expo hall is the playground. And at 6 o'clock, there's going to be a happy hour in the playground, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And that leads right into the Augie Awards. It's happening right here on the main stage at 7 o'clock. So that's going to be really exciting. A lot of great awards being given out to some great companies. And then after the Augie Awards, directly afterwards, is the after party, the official AWE after party at the Glass House in San Jose. There's going to be shuttles right outside that'll take everyone to the after party afterwards. So a jam-packed night. All right, thanks everybody, and have a great rest of the conference.